At 2 a.m., my son knocked on my door and collapsed. "Mom," she wiped out all the accounts and left me with nothing. I simply served coffee and made a short phone call. By dawn, my daughter-in-law was standing before a judge who already had the full dossier.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The sound of desperate knocking at my front door at 2 in the morning would have terrified most 64-year-old women living alone. But after 30 years on the federal bench, very little surprises me anymore. I slipped on my robe and peered through the peephole to see my son Michael slumped against my doorframe, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face streaked with tears. "Mom," he whispered when I opened the door, his voice breaking like a child's. "She's gone. Amanda's gone, and she took everything." I guided him to my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped him with homework decades ago, where we'd shared countless conversations about his dreams and fears. Now my successful 35-year-old son sat before me, looking smaller than I'd seen him since he was 7 years old and afraid of monsters under his bed. "Tell me what happened," I said quietly, filling the coffee maker. Some conversations require the ritual of preparation, the comfort of familiar sounds and smells. Michael's hands shook as he tried to form the words. "I came home from the business trip tonight. The house was empty. Not just empty of people, Mom. Empty. She took the furniture, the art, even the kids' toys." His voice cracked. "When I checked the accounts, everything was gone. Our savings, the business accounts she had access to, even the college funds for Emma and Jake." I poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to his just the way he liked it since high school. My movements were calm, methodical, even though my mind was already working through possibilities, connections, legal precedents. Old habits from the courtroom never really fade. "Where are the children?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "With her. She picked them up from school yesterday while I was flying back from Chicago. The neighbors saw her loading suitcases into a moving truck." He buried his face in his hands. "She planned this, Mom. While I was working 16-hour days to build our life, she was planning to destroy it." I sat across from him, studying his face. Michael had always been trusting, sometimes to a fault. In high school, he'd lend money to friends who never paid him back. In college, he'd help classmates with projects and let them take credit. I'd tried to teach him that kindness didn't require naivety, but some lessons can only be learned through experience. "Have you tried calling her?" I asked. Straight to voicemail. I drove to her sister's place, her parents' house, even that spa where she goes with her friends. No one's seen her, or they're lying. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, I don't know what to do. My lawyer says it could take months to track her down, and even then, if she's moved the money offshore." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was cold, trembling slightly. "Michael, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to make a phone call, and then I want you to go upstairs to your old room and try to get some sleep." "Mom, you don't understand. This isn't something that can be fixed with a phone call. Amanda has connections, resources. She's always been smart about money, smarter than me." I should have seen this coming. I squeezed his hand gently. "You're right about one thing. She is smart, but intelligence without character is just sophisticated selfishness." I stood and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept my address book, the real one with numbers most people didn't have. "Trust me on this, sweetheart. Some things are easier to fix than you think." After Michael reluctantly went upstairs, I sat alone in my kitchen with my coffee and my thoughts. 23 years since I'd retired from the federal bench, but Judge Patricia Morrison still knew exactly who to call at 2:30 in the morning. I dialed a number from memory. "Chambers." The voice was crisp, professional, despite the late hour. "Robert, it's Patricia Morrison. I need a favor." "Judge Morrison." The warmth in Robert Chen's voice was immediate. He'd been one of my best law clerks 15 years ago, now a federal prosecutor with his own impressive reputation. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" "I have a situation involving interstate flight, possible money laundering, and custodial interference. The perpetrator is Amanda Morrison, married name. I'll have a complete file to you within 6 hours, but I need you to be ready to move fast." "Are we talking about family, Judge?" "My daughter-in-law. And my grandchildren. There was a brief pause. Robert had worked for me long enough to know that I didn't ask for personal favors lightly. What do you need? Everything you can give me. Asset freezing orders, BOLO alerts, the works. She's got a head start, but she doesn't know what she's dealing with. Consider it done. Send me everything you have. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, listening to the soft sounds of my son sleeping upstairs for the first time in his childhood bedroom in over a decade. Amanda Morrison thought she was playing chess with a retired old woman who spent her days gardening and volunteering at the church auxiliary. She had no idea she'd just declared war on a woman who'd spent 3 decades sending people to federal prison. I opened my laptop and began typing. Asset searches, background investigations, travel alerts. By morning, I would have a file that would make Amanda's head spin. She wanted to play games with my family. She was about to learn that some games have consequences she never imagined. The coffee grew cold as I worked, but I barely noticed. For the first time in years, I felt the familiar surge of purpose that had sustained me through countless trials, the sharp focus that had made me one of the most respected judges in the federal system. Amanda Morrison had made her first and last mistake. She'd underestimated a mother's love and a judge's patience. Both had just run out. By 6 a.m, I had compiled a 70-page dossier on Amanda Morrison. But as I printed the final pages, memories flooded back of all the warning signs I'd documented mentally over the past 8 years. Warning signs I'd kept to myself because Michael seemed happy, and I'd learned long ago that unsolicited advice from mothers-in-law is rarely welcome. I should have trusted my instincts the first time I met Amanda. It was at Michael's office Christmas party in 2016. He'd been dating her for 3 months and was absolutely smitten. She was beautiful, certainly. Blonde hair that caught the light just so. Designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Perfect makeup that looked effortless but wasn't. When Michael introduced us, she smiled that practiced smile and said, "Oh, you must be so proud of Michael. He's told me all about how you raised him as a single mother after his father died." The statement was factually correct, but something in her tone made my judicial instincts prickle. It was the way she emphasized single mother, not with admiration for the sacrifice, but with the subtle implication that I was somehow lacking, incomplete, a woman to be pitied rather than respected. "Michael turned out well despite the circumstances," she'd added, her hand possessive on his arm. Despite the circumstances. As if losing my husband to cancer when Michael was 12 was some kind of character flaw on my part, rather than a tragedy we'd survived together. I'd smiled politely and changed the subject, but I made a mental note. In my courtroom, I'd learned to pay attention to language. The words people choose reveal more about their character than they realize. Over the months that followed, I watched Amanda systematically separate Michael from the people who'd known him longest. It was subtle, skillfully done. She never directly criticized his friends or family. Instead, she used scheduling conflicts, social obligations, and gentle manipulation. "Oh, dinner with your mom again this Sunday?" she'd say with a slight sigh. "I was hoping we could finally visit that gallery opening, but family comes first, of course." The words were supportive, but the undertone was clear. Spending time with me was a burden, an obligation that interfered with more sophisticated pursuits. When Michael's college roommate David got married, Amanda developed a sudden migraine the morning of the wedding. When his poker group tried to maintain their monthly tradition, she'd schedule couples events the same nights. When I invited them for holidays, she'd remind Michael how stressful family gatherings could be for her, how she needed quiet time to recharge from her demanding job. "She's just introverted," Michael would explain to me privately. "Large groups overwhelm her, but I noticed she had no trouble with large groups when they involved her coworkers, her friends, or networking events that could advance her career." Amanda wasn't introverted, she was strategic. The financial red flags started about 2 years into their relationship. Michael had always been generous but sensible with money. Suddenly, he was buying expensive jewelry because Amanda deserves beautiful things, taking lavish vacations because she works so hard, and eventually purchasing a house that was far beyond what his salary could comfortably support. "The mortgage is steep," he'd confided during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. "But Amanda says it's an investment. Real estate always appreciates, right?" I'd bitten my tongue. Real estate appreciates, yes, but cash flow matters more than appreciation when you're stretching every dollar to make payments. Amanda had convinced him to buy a house that would make them look successful rather than help them build actual wealth. But the moment I should have intervened came 3 years ago, during what I now realize was a carefully orchestrated test. Michael had been in a minor car accident, rear-ended at a traffic light, nothing serious, but he needed to go to the emergency room to get his neck checked. Amanda was out of town on a business trip, so he called me. I dropped everything and spent 4 hours in the ER with him, just like I had when he was a child with strep throat or a broken arm. When Amanda returned from her trip 2 days later, she thanked me for babysitting Michael. Babysitting. As if caring for my adult son during a moment of need was somehow beneath both our dignities. I know it must have been inconvenient, she'd said, her voice dripping with false gratitude. Taking time away from your gardening and book club to deal with hospital drama. The casual dismissal of my life as nothing more than hobbies and social activities might have stung if it weren't so revealing. Amanda saw me as irrelevant, a quaint relic whose entire existence revolved around small, meaningless pursuits. She had no idea that my book club included 2 former Supreme Court clerks and a federal appeals court judge, or that my gardening provided me with the same meditative focus that had helped me through some of the most complex legal decisions of my career. More importantly, she'd revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what family means. In her worldview, caring for someone you love during a crisis was an inconvenience to be managed, not a privilege to be embraced. I should have said something then. Should have pulled Michael aside and explained what I was seeing. But he was so happy, so convinced he'd found his perfect partner. And I'd spent enough years watching couples in divorce court to know that the person who points out problems in a relationship is often blamed for creating them. The wedding planning was my final confirmation that Amanda saw our family as a problem to be solved rather than people to be embraced. She scheduled dress fittings during my court hours. I was still taking occasional cases as a mediator, and venue visits during times she knew I couldn't attend. When I finally managed to clear my schedule for one appointment, she'd already made all the major decisions. "We didn't want to burden you with all these details," she'd explained sweetly. "I know how busy you are with your volunteer work, my volunteer work, as if 3 decades on the federal bench had prepared me for nothing more than organizing church bake sales." The guest list for their wedding told the whole story. Amanda's side of the church was packed with colleagues, college friends, sorority sisters, and extended family. Michael's side was notably sparse. Many of his oldest friends had been gradually phased out of his life. His college buddies received invitations so late that several couldn't attend. Even his cousin James, who'd been like a brother to him growing up, was seated in the back row because Amanda had decided he didn't photograph well for the formal pictures. I sat in the front row, wearing my best suit and a smile that hurt my face, watching my son marry a woman who was systematically erasing everyone who'd loved him before she came along. But he looked so happy standing at that altar, so proud to be Amanda's husband, that I kept my concerns to myself. The real manipulation became clear in the years that followed. Amanda encouraged Michael to work longer hours, take on more responsibilities, travel more frequently for business. "We have goals," she'd tell people at parties. "Michael is going to build something really special." But while he was building that something special, she was the one home with the children, controlling the household finances, managing their social calendar, and deciding who deserved access to their family. I saw my grandchildren Emma and Jake exactly when Amanda deemed appropriate. Birthday parties where I was relegated to the role of nice grandmother who brings presents. School events where I sat separately from the real family. Holiday gatherings that were scheduled around Amanda's preferences and canceled if I had any suggestions for traditions or contributions. "Kids need routine," Amanda would explain when I asked if I could take Emma and Jake for occasional overnight visits. "Disruptions in their schedule make them cranky." But disruptions in their schedule were fine when it meant expensive vacations, weekend trips to Amanda's parents' lake house, or sleepovers with the children of Amanda's carefully curated social circle. The most painful moment came last Christmas. I'd asked if I could teach Emma to bake my mother's sugar cookies, a tradition that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in our family. Amanda had smiled that practice smile and said, "Oh, that's so sweet, but Emma's already learning to bake from the French pastry chef I hired for her cooking lessons. We want to give her the best training, not just home recipes." Home recipes. As if the love and history baked into those cookies were somehow inferior to professional technique. As if the hours my grandmother had spent teaching my mother, and my mother had spent teaching me, and I had spent dreaming of teaching my granddaughter, were worthless compared to lessons from someone paid to care. That night, I'd gone home to my quiet house and finally admitted what I'd known for years. Amanda Morrison didn't just dislike me. She was threatened by me. Threatened by my history with Michael, by my relationship with the grandchildren, by the simple fact that I existed as proof that Michael had a full, rich life before she entered it. She'd spent 8 years systematically reducing my role in my son's life from beloved mother to occasional inconvenience. She'd isolated him from his friends, controlled his finances, and trained my grandchildren to see me as a peripheral figure rather than family. And now, sitting in my kitchen at dawn with 70 pages of evidence spread across my table, I realized that stealing Michael's money and disappearing with the children wasn't Amanda's endgame. It was her opening move. She wanted him completely broken, utterly dependent, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. She wanted him desperate enough to accept whatever terms she dictated for the return of his children. She wanted him to believe that his mother was just a useless old woman who couldn't help him, that his friends had forgotten him, that his only hope was to crawl back to her on whatever conditions she set. Amanda Morrison had played a long game, and she'd played it well, but she'd made one critical error in her calculations. She'd assumed that Judge Patricia Morrison had actually retired. By 7 in the morning, my phone had become a command center. 3 decades of relationships in the federal justice system don't simply disappear when you retire. They evolve into something more powerful. A network of people who owe you favors, respect your judgment, and trust your word without question. Robert Chen called first with preliminary results that made my blood run cold. "Judge Morrison, we've got a problem. Amanda Morrison has been planning this for at least 18 months. She opened accounts in 3 different states, established residency in Nevada under a slightly altered name, and here's the kicker. She's done this before." I set my coffee cup down carefully. Explain. Her maiden name is Amanda Catherine Westfield. Before she married your son, she was briefly married to a David Hutchinson in California. The marriage lasted 14 months and ended when she cleaned out their joint accounts and disappeared. Hutchinson never pressed charges because he was convinced she'd been kidnapped or worse. He spent 6 months and $15,000 hiring private investigators to find her. My hands clenched involuntarily. She let him think she was dead? Gets worse. After California, she surfaced in Texas under the name Amanda Walsh. Another brief marriage, another disappearance, another devastated husband who thought something terrible had happened to her. This is a pattern, Judge. Your son is victim number 3 that we know of. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of evidence building a case. Amanda hadn't just stolen from Michael. She was a predator who specialized in financially and emotionally destroying trusting men. Men like my son, who believed in love and commitment and the basic decency of human nature. "What about the children?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting. She's never taken children before. This is escalation. My guess? She's using Emma and Jake as leverage because your son has more assets than her previous targets. She can't just disappear this time. She needs him compliant and desperate." After hanging up with Robert, I called Margaret Walsh, my former bailiff who'd moved to private investigation after retiring from the court system. If anyone could track Amanda's movements, it was Margaret. She'd spent 25 years watching me dissect cases and had absorbed enough investigative instincts to run her own agency. "Patricia, honey, I was wondering when you'd need me again." Margaret's warm voice filled my kitchen. "I saw the alerts go out this morning. Your daughter-in-law?" "A former daughter-in-law, if I have anything to say about it. What can you tell me?" "I've got contacts at every airport within a 6-hour drive. Credit card activity stopped at 11:47 p.m. yesterday at a gas station outside Indianapolis. After that, nothing. But here's what's interesting. She reserved a storage unit in Nevada 3 months ago. paid for a full year in advance. My mind clicked through the implications. She's been moving assets gradually, storing them until she was ready to disappear completely. That's my read. But Patricia, there's something else. The Nevada unit is listed under the name Amanda Morrison. Not Westfield, not Walsh. Morrison. She's not trying to hide from the law. She's sending your son a message. The message was clear. She wanted Michael to know she could take his name, his money, his children, and his future, all while hiding in plain sight. This wasn't just theft. It was psychological warfare designed to break him completely. My next call was to Judge Thomas Bradley, who'd taken over my caseload when I retired. Tom and I had worked together for 15 years, and I'd mentored him through some of the most complex federal cases of his career. Patricia Morrison, I should have known you'd surface eventually. What can I do for you? I need emergency orders, Tom. Asset freezing, custodial interference, interstate flight. The works. Federal or state, both. I'm sending you everything within the hour. The perpetrator has crossed state lines with stolen funds and kidnapped children. Kidnapped! His voice sharpened. Patricia, are we talking about your family? My grandchildren. And Tom, there's something else. This woman has done this before. Multiple times. She's a serial predator who specializes in marriage fraud. There was a pause. Tom Bradley had seen enough criminals to recognize patterns when they emerged. How many victims? 3 that we know of, possibly more. I need every tool in the federal toolkit on this one. You'll have them. And Patricia, I'm sorry this is happening to your family, but if anyone can handle this, it's you. By 8:30, I had assembled what amounted to a federal task force operating out of my kitchen. Robert Chen was coordinating with the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Margaret Walsh had investigators in 4 states tracking Amanda's movements. Judge Bradley was preparing emergency orders that would freeze every account Amanda had accessed in the past 2 years. But the call that would prove most crucial came from an unexpected source. Judge Morrison? This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I understand you're looking for Amanda Morrison and 2 children? That's correct. How did you— Federal alert came across my desk an hour ago. But Judge, I've been looking for Amanda Morrison for 6 months. We have an active investigation into marriage fraud, identity theft, and custodial interference involving a woman matching her description exactly. My blood chilled. Another victim? Stephen Reynolds. Married Amanda Morrison. Yes, she kept the name. 14 months ago. 3 weeks ago, she disappeared with their 6-month-old son and approximately $200,000 from Reynolds' business accounts. But here's the thing, Judge. Stephen Reynolds hired private investigators who tracked her to a compound outside Reno. She's not alone. What kind of compound? High-end retreat center called New Beginnings. Markets itself as a sanctuary for women escaping difficult circumstances. Very exclusive, very private, very expensive. Our investigation suggests it's actually a base of operations for several women running similar schemes across multiple states. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Amanda wasn't just a serial predator. She was part of an organized network. Women who shared techniques, supported each other's schemes, and possibly rotated through different territories to avoid detection. Detective Martinez, I need everything you have on this compound. Every detail, every connection, every person involved. Already being compiled, Judge. But we're going to need federal involvement to move on this. The compound crosses county lines, and we suspect interstate commerce violations. This is bigger than local jurisdiction can handle. You'll have federal involvement within 6 hours. I guarantee it. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of my daughter-in-law's crimes, feeling the familiar surge of righteous anger that had sustained me through 3 decades of seeing justice served. Amanda Morrison wasn't just a woman who'd made bad choices. She was a professional criminal who'd built her entire adult life around destroying families. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway at 9 o'clock, looking slightly more human after a few hours of sleep. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them, but his eyes were clearer. "Mom, I can smell coffee and I hear you've been making a lot of phone calls. Please tell me you haven't been calling everyone we know to tell them about Amanda." I poured him a fresh cup and gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk. If this is about hiring lawyers or private investigators, I appreciate it, but I can't afford—" "Michael." My voice carried the tone I'd used in courtroom when attorneys needed to stop talking and start listening. "Sit down." He sat, cradling his coffee cup like a lifeline. I reached across the table and took his hands in mine. They were still shaking slightly. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What Amanda did to you, stealing your money, taking your children, disappearing in the night, she's done it before, multiple times, to multiple men." His face went white. "What do you mean, before?" "I mean she's a career criminal who specializes in marriage fraud. She marries trusting men, gains access to their finances, systematically drains their accounts, and disappears. You're the third victim we've identified so far. That's impossible. Amanda loves me. She loves the kids. This has to be some kind of breakdown, some kind of crisis. People don't just—" "Some people do, Michael. Some people view other human beings as resources to be exploited, rather than partners to be loved. Amanda Morrison is one of those people." I pulled out the folder I'd been building and spread the documents across the table. Bank records, marriage certificates, police reports, investigative summaries. The evidence of Amanda's systematic destruction of 3 men's lives laid out in black and white. Michael's hands trembled as he picked up each document, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally, devastating understanding. "The storage unit in Nevada," he whispered, staring at one of Margaret's reports. "She told me she was storing her grandmother's antiques. Said she couldn't bear to get rid of them but didn't have room in the house. She was storing your assets, Michael, moving them gradually so you wouldn't notice until it was too late. The business trips." His voice was hollow now, accepting. "She always had reasons to be in different states. Client meetings, conferences, family emergencies. She was setting up accounts, establishing residences, building escape routes." I squeezed his hands gently. "She's also taken Emma and Jake to a compound in Nevada where she's working with other women running similar schemes. This isn't just about money anymore, sweetheart. She's using your children as leverage in a much larger operation." Michael looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the 7-year-old boy who'd asked me why his daddy had to die, why bad things happened to good people, why the world wasn't fair. "What do we do, Mom? How do we get them back?" I smiled for the first time since he'd knocked on my door at 2 in the morning. "We do what I've been doing for the past 30 years, honey. We build a case that's so airtight, so comprehensive, so legally bulletproof that Amanda Morrison and everyone helping her will have no choice but to surrender. But I'm just one person. She's got resources, connections, a whole network of people helping her." I picked up my phone and showed him the call log. 15 calls made, 15 powerful people now working on behalf of my son and grandchildren. Federal prosecutors, FBI agents, federal judges, private investigators, and local law enforcement across 4 states. "Michael," I said softly, "you're not just one person. You're my son. And she just made the mistake of declaring war on a family that includes a federal judge who spent 30 years learning exactly how to destroy people like her." For the first time since he'd collapsed at my door, Michael Morrison smiled. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt like I had my son back. The call came at 5:47 a.m., just as the first light was breaking over the horizon. Detective Martinez's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "Judge Morrison, we've got her. Amanda Morrison and the children are in federal custody as of 20 minutes ago. She's being transported to the federal courthouse for emergency arraignment at 7 a.m. Judge Bradley is handling the hearing personally." I closed my eyes, feeling a relief so profound it made my knees weak. The children? Safe. Emma and Jake are with Child Protective Services temporarily, but they're unharmed. A little confused, but physically fine. They're asking for their daddy. Michael had been dozing on my couch, unwilling to go back upstairs after the revelations of yesterday. I gently shook his shoulder, and he came awake instantly, the hyper-alert response of someone living in crisis mode. "The kids?" he asked immediately. "Safe. Amanda's in federal custody. Emergency hearing in an hour. I'd seen strong men cry before, but watching my son's face crumple with relief and gratitude was almost more than I could bear. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded inside him. "It's over?" he whispered. "The criminal part is over. The healing part is just beginning." We drove to the federal courthouse in my old Honda, the same car I'd driven to work for the past 15 years. Michael kept staring out the window like he couldn't quite believe the world was still there, still functioning normally while his life had been turned inside out. "Mom," he said as we pulled into the courthouse parking garage, "how did you do it? How did you mobilize so many people so quickly?" I turned off the engine and looked at him. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, being a federal judge isn't just about what you accomplish in the courtroom. It's about the relationships you build, the trust you earn, and the reputation you establish for standing up for justice. When I called in those favors last night, I wasn't just asking for help with a personal matter. I was asking colleagues to help stop a serial predator who'd been destroying families for years. But what about all those times you seemed so quiet about Amanda? So accepting of how she treated you?" I sighed, remembering all the family gatherings where I'd bitten my tongue, all the times I'd smiled politely while Amanda dismissed or diminished me in front of my own son and grandchildren. "Michael, there's a difference between being passive and being strategic. I was never passive about Amanda. I was gathering information, documenting patterns, building a case. In the courtroom, I learned that the person who speaks first often reveals their weaknesses. I let Amanda show me exactly who she was before I acted." "You were investigating her the whole time?" "Not investigating exactly, but observing, remembering. A good judge learns to see people clearly, and I saw Amanda clearly from the first time I met her. The problem was that you loved her, and love makes people blind to things that are obvious to everyone else." We walked into the courthouse together, through security checkpoints that felt like coming home to me. The guards recognized me, greeting me with warm smiles and respectful nods. This building had been my second home for 30 years, and walking these halls again reminded me why I'd loved the work so much. Judge Bradley's courtroom was already filled when we arrived. I recognized several faces: Robert Chen looking professionally satisfied, Detective Martinez conferring with FBI agents, federal marshals stationed at strategic points. But the figure that drew my attention was seated at the defendant's table. Amanda Morrison looked smaller than I remembered. Gone was the perfectly styled hair, the designer clothing, the confident bearing that had dominated every family gathering for 8 years. Wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, she looked like what she was, a criminal caught in the act. Her lawyer was a young public defender who looked overwhelmed by the scope of the charges: marriage fraud, interstate theft, custodial interference, racketeering, money laundering. The indictment was comprehensive and devastating. "Your Honor," Robert Chen addressed the court as the prosecutor, "the United States believes the defendant represents a significant flight risk and danger to the community. Evidence suggests she's part of an organized criminal network that has systematically defrauded multiple victims across several states over the past decade." Amanda's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the courtroom until they found mine. For a moment, we stared at each other across the space that separated us. I saw recognition dawn in her expression, not just recognition of my face, but understanding of what I represented, who I really was, and how thoroughly she'd miscalculated. Her mouth opened slightly, and I could almost read her thoughts. The quiet old woman she'd dismissed as irrelevant was Judge Patricia Morrison. The grandmother she'd systematically excluded from family events was the federal judge who'd just orchestrated her downfall. Judge Bradley was speaking, but Amanda wasn't listening. She was staring at me with a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been respect, the predator recognizing that she'd chosen the wrong prey. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Robert continued, "we have evidence that the defendant has used similar schemes to defraud at least 2 other victims in California and Texas. She has demonstrated a pattern of creating false identities, establishing residency in multiple states, and systematically draining assets from trusting partners before disappearing entirely." The public defender made a weak attempt at arguing for bail, citing Amanda's lack of prior convictions and ties to the community. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Bradley wasn't swayed. "Ms. Morrison," Judge Bradley addressed Amanda directly, "you are charged with multiple federal felonies involving fraud, theft, and endangering the welfare of children. Given the evidence of flight risk and the serious nature of these charges, I'm ordering you held without bail pending trial." Amanda's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," she burst out, ignoring her lawyer's attempts to quiet her. "I'm being railroaded by a vindictive old woman who's never liked me." The courtroom fell silent. Amanda had just made the classic mistake of every defendant I'd ever seen self-destruct. She'd let her emotions override her common sense. Judge Bradley's voice was ice-cold. "Ms. Morrison, are you referring to Judge Patricia Morrison, who retired from this court with a distinguished record of 30 years of service to federal justice?" Amanda's face went white as she realized her error. I didn't mean. Judge Morrison is not only a colleague I hold in the highest respect, but she is also the person whose grandchildren you allegedly kidnapped and whose son you allegedly defrauded. Your comments are inappropriate and noted for the record." I felt Michael's hand squeeze mine under the table. Amanda had just publicly revealed her contempt for me in a way that would be remembered by every person in that courtroom and documented in the official transcript. "Before this hearing concludes," Judge Bradley continued, "I want to address the recovery of assets and the immediate welfare of the minor children involved." Over the next hour, the court systematically dismantled Amanda's carefully constructed scheme. Frozen accounts were unfrozen and returned to Michael's control. The storage unit in Nevada was ordered seized, its contents inventoried and returned. Most importantly, Emma and Jake were released to their father's custody immediately. As the hearing concluded and Amanda was led away in shackles, she looked back at me one final time. There was no longer any pretense of innocence or confusion in her expression. She knew exactly what had happened and who was responsible. "You think you've won," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom despite her lawyer's frantic attempts to silence her. "But Michael will never forgive you for this. You've destroyed his family." I stood slowly, drawing on 30 years of courtroom presence and authority. When I spoke, my voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "Amanda Morrison, I didn't destroy Michael's family. I saved it. From you." Outside the courthouse, Michael and I waited for Child Protective Services to bring Emma and Jake. The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps where I'd stood countless times over the years, watching justice being served. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you about 8 years of apologies. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You were manipulated by an expert. Amanda Morrison spent years isolating you from everyone who cared about you, including me. That wasn't your fault. But I should have seen it, should have listened when you tried to warn me." I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The stress lines around his eyes, the way he held his shoulders like he was carrying an invisible weight, the careful way he spoke as if every word might be the wrong one. Amanda hadn't just stolen his money. She'd stolen his confidence, his judgment, his ability to trust himself. Michael, when someone spends 8 years telling you that your instincts are wrong, that your family doesn't understand you, that the people who love you are actually obstacles to your happiness, it becomes very difficult to trust your own judgment. Amanda was a professional manipulator. She knew exactly how to make you doubt everyone except her, including you. Especially me, because I was the biggest threat to her control. I knew you before she did. I loved you without conditions or expectations. I couldn't be bought, manipulated, or intimidated into accepting her version of reality. A car pulled up to the curb, and Emma and Jake climbed out looking small and uncertain. They spotted their father and ran to him, their faces lighting up with relief and joy. Watching Michael embrace his children, seeing the way they clung to him like he was their anchor in a confusing world, I felt something settle in my chest that had been tight and anxious for years. Emma looked over Michael's shoulder at me, her 7-year-old face serious and thoughtful. "Grandma Patricia?" she said. "Daddy told us you helped find us. Thank you." You're very welcome, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're safe. Jake, who was 5 and more direct in his emotions, wiggled out of his father's arms and ran to me. Grandma, I missed you. Mommy said we couldn't call you because you were busy, but I wanted to tell you about my soccer games. I knelt down and gathered him into a hug, breathing in the sweet smell of childhood and innocence. Well, I'm not busy anymore, Jake. I want to hear about every single game. As we drove home together, the 4 of us squeezed into my Honda like a normal family going about their normal lives. Michael asked the question I'd been expecting. What happens now? With Amanda, I mean. How long will she be in prison? I considered my answer carefully. The charges Amanda faced carried significant prison time, and given her pattern of behavior across multiple states, prosecutors would likely push for the maximum sentence. But more importantly, the investigation had uncovered the network of women operating similar schemes, which meant Amanda would be facing additional charges as the case developed. A long time, I said simply. Long enough for Emma and Jake to grow up without her influence. Long enough for you to rebuild your life and remember who you were before she came along. And what about us? Our family, I mean. Can we fix what she broke? I looked in the rearview mirror at Emma and Jake, already chattering about wanting to see my garden, asking if I still knew how to make chocolate chip cookies, planning sleepovers and story times, and all the grandmother activities they'd been denied for years. Michael, I said softly, some things can't be broken. They can be buried, neglected, or hidden away, but they can't actually be destroyed. Love is like that. Family is like that. We don't need to fix anything, sweetheart. We just need to remember what was always there. By the time we pulled into my driveway, Emma was asleep against the window, and Jake was making plans for the fort we were going to build in my backyard. Michael looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, the constant tension finally leaving his shoulders. Amanda Morrison had tried to erase me from my son's life, to reduce me to an irrelevant old woman whose only purpose was to be managed and controlled. She'd underestimated the power of a mother's love, the strength of family bonds, and the resources of a woman who'd spent 30 years learning how to protect people from predators exactly like her. But most importantly, she'd forgotten that some games have consequences that extend far beyond the players involved. Amanda Morrison hadn't just declared war on my family. She'd declared war on every family she'd destroyed, every man she'd defrauded, every child she'd used as a pawn in her schemes. And now, finally, she was going to pay for all of it. 3 weeks after Amanda's arrest, I was teaching Emma how to braid challah bread in my kitchen when Michael appeared in the doorway with a stack of legal papers and an expression I couldn't quite read. The divorce attorney needs my signature on the final documents, he said, settling into his old chair at my kitchen table. It's really over. Emma looked up from the dough she was kneading with fierce concentration. What's divorce mean, Grandma? I helped her fold the dough properly, buying myself time to find the right words. It means that sometimes grown-ups who got married decide they can't live together anymore, sweetheart. So they ask a judge to help them live in separate places. Is Daddy getting divorced from Mommy Amanda? Michael's jaw tightened at the name. Even 3 weeks later, hearing Amanda referred to as Mommy was clearly difficult for him. Yes, Emma. Daddy is getting divorced from Amanda. Good, Emma said with the matter-of-fact clarity that only 7-year-olds possess. She wasn't very nice to Grandma Patricia. Out of the mouths of babes. I squeezed Emma's hand gently, marveling at how children can cut through adult complications to reach simple truths. Jake wandered in from the living room where he'd been building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions and dining room chairs. Grandma, can we have hot chocolate with the bread when it's done? Of course we can. But first, come wash your hands and help us with the braiding. As I watched my grandchildren work alongside me in my kitchen, their small hands learning the same techniques my grandmother had taught me decades ago, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with Amanda's legal troubles and everything to do with reclaimed time, restored relationships, and the simple pleasure of being needed and wanted by the people I loved most. Michael signed the divorce papers methodically, his pen scratching across page after page of legal language that would officially sever his connection to 8 years of manipulation and abuse. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked at me with an expression of exhaustion mixed with relief. I keep expecting to feel sad about it, he said quietly. The end of my marriage, the kids losing their mother figure, everything falling apart. But mostly, I just feel free. That's because you're finally able to see clearly, I told him, checking the oven temperature for the challah. When someone spends years convincing you that your reality is wrong, that your instincts can't be trusted, that the people who love you are actually problems to be managed, it takes time to remember who you really are. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd watched Michael slowly emerge from the fog of confusion and self-doubt that Amanda had cultivated so carefully. He was remembering how to make decisions without second-guessing himself, how to express opinions without checking first to see if they would be approved, how to interact with his children without worrying that every conversation was being monitored and judged. The change in Emma and Jake was even more dramatic. Without Amanda's constant management of their emotions, schedules, and relationships, they'd become more spontaneous, more affectionate, more themselves. Jake had started sleeping through the night again instead of waking up with nightmares he couldn't explain. Emma had begun talking about school friends she wanted to invite over, activities she was interested in trying, books she wanted to read. "Daddy," Emma said, carefully laying strips of braided dough on a baking sheet, "can we stay at Grandma's house forever?" Michael smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile I'd seen from him in years. "We can stay as long as Grandma will have us." "Forever, then," I said firmly. "This house is too big for just me anyway." That evening, after the children were asleep and the challah had been devoured with appropriate amounts of butter and honey, Michael and I sat on my back porch with cups of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I need to tell you something," Michael said, his voice serious, "about the money Amanda stole." "What about it?" "I know you think it's all been recovered, but there's more missing than what showed up in the frozen accounts. A lot more. I've been going through financial records for weeks, and I think she was skimming smaller amounts for years. Maybe as much as $300,000 over the past 4 years. I sipped my tea thoughtfully. "Have you mentioned this to Robert Chen?" "Not yet. I keep thinking maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm miscalculating something. Amanda always handled the detailed bookkeeping, and I'm realizing now that I never paid close enough attention to what she was actually doing with our money." "Michael, that's exactly what she was counting on. Predators like Amanda don't steal everything at once. They skim gradually, so their victims don't notice until it's too late. The fact that you're finding discrepancies now doesn't mean you were stupid then. It means you trusted your wife to handle household finances, which is what normal people do in normal marriages." He was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. $300,000, Mom. That was Emma and Jake's college fund, our retirement savings. The emergency fund Dad always told me to maintain. She stole their entire future. "No," I said firmly. "She stole money. Money can be replaced. Their future depends on having a father who loves them, protects them, and teaches them how to recognize people who might try to hurt them. She couldn't steal that because she never had access to it. But how do I rebuild from this? How do I start over at 35 with 2 children and no savings and a credit history that's probably destroyed?" I turned to look at my son, this man who'd been raised to believe that financial security was the foundation of a good life, that planning and saving and careful investment were the keys to protecting his family. Amanda had attacked those beliefs systematically, using his own values against him. "Michael, do you remember what we did after your father died?" He nodded slowly. "You went back to school, law school at night while working full-time during the day." "That's right. I was 38 years old with a 12-year-old son and a mortgage I could barely afford. Your father's life insurance covered the immediate expenses, but I had to build a career from scratch. It took me 6 years to finish law school, another 4 to establish my practice, and then 12 more years before I was nominated to the federal bench. But you had a plan. You knew what you wanted to do." "I knew I wanted to provide for you and create a stable life for our family. The specifics of how to do that, I figured out as I went along. Planning is important, but adaptability is more important. Resilience is more important, and love is most important of all." I reached over and took his hand. "You're 35 years old, Michael. You have skills, experience, intelligence, and work ethic that no one can steal from you. You have 2 beautiful children who need you to show them that setbacks aren't permanent. that good people can recover from bad situations, and that families stick together through difficult times. And you have something else, I continued, smiling at him. You have a mother who spent 30 years learning how the financial and legal systems work, who has connections throughout the federal justice system, and who has been quietly investing her savings for the past 23 years. You're not starting over alone, sweetheart. We're rebuilding together. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I can't ask you to. You're not asking me anything. I'm telling you what's going to happen. We're going to call Robert Chen tomorrow and report every penny of missing money you've identified. We're going to make sure Amanda faces additional charges for the full scope of her theft. And then we're going to focus on building the kind of life you want for Emma and Jake. What kind of life is that? I looked through the kitchen window at the remnants of our evening together. Emma's artwork covering my refrigerator, Jake's soccer cleats by the back door, Michael's laptop open on my dining room table where he'd been working while I helped the children with homework. The easy rhythm of a family that functioned on love and respect rather than control and manipulation. The kind of life where children grow up feeling safe and valued. Where they learn to trust their instincts, speak their minds, and believe that the people who love them actually want what's best for them. The kind of life where a father can make mistakes without being made to feel like a failure. Where a grandmother can be involved without being made to feel like an intrusion. The kind of life we had before Amanda, Michael said softly. The kind of life we're going to have again, but better. Because now we know how precious it is. Now we know what it looks like when someone tries to destroy it. We'll be more careful, more aware, more protective of each other. That night, as I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of my family sleeping safely under my roof, I thought about the phone call I'd made to Robert Chen earlier that evening. The investigation into Amanda's network had expanded beyond anything we'd initially imagined. Authorities in 8 states were now coordinating to build cases against 17 women who'd been operating similar schemes for more than a decade. The New Beginnings compound in Nevada had been raided, revealing sophisticated financial records, false identity documents, and evidence of coordination between women who specialized in targeting different types of victims. Amanda had been part of something much larger and more organized than we'd initially realized. But what struck me most about the investigation wasn't the scope of the criminal enterprise or the number of victims involved. It was the profile of the women who'd been caught up in Amanda's network. They weren't desperate criminals driven to fraud by poverty or addiction. They were educated, middle-class women who'd made a deliberate choice to view other human beings as resources to be exploited. Amanda Morrison had looked at my son and seen dollar signs. She'd looked at my grandchildren and seen leverage. She'd looked at me and seen an obstacle to be removed. She'd been incapable of seeing any of us as actual people deserving of love, respect, and honest treatment. The tragedy wasn't just the money she'd stolen or the years of manipulation she'd inflicted on Michael. The tragedy was that she'd had access to a genuine family, real love, and the opportunity to build something meaningful, and she'd chosen to destroy it all for temporary financial gain. But that was Amanda's loss, not ours. We were still here, still loving each other, still building the kind of life that mattered. She'd tried to steal our family, but family isn't something that can be stolen. It can be tested, strained, or temporarily separated. But the bonds that really matter survive everything. 2 days later, I was reading a bedtime story to Emma and Jake when Michael knocked on the bedroom door with news that would change everything once again. Mom, I just got off the phone with Robert Chen. They've arrested 6 more women connected to Amanda's network, including the woman who was running the Nevada compound. And they've recovered assets worth over $2 million from various schemes. That's wonderful news, sweetheart. There's more. The FBI wants to use my case as the foundation for a federal prosecution under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. RICO charges, Mom. They're treating this as organized crime. I set down the book I'd been reading to the children. What does that mean for Amanda? Life in prison, possibly. And definitely no chance of parole for at least 25 years. Emma looked up from her pillow with sleepy confusion. What's prison, Daddy? Michael sat down on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. It's a place where people go when they've broken important laws and hurt other people. Amanda broke laws and hurt our family. so she has to go to prison for a very long time. Good, Emma said again with that same matter-of-fact clarity. She was mean. After the children were asleep, Michael and I talked long into the night about justice, consequences, and the difference between punishment and healing. Amanda Morrison would spend the rest of her life in federal prison, cut off from the world she'd tried to manipulate and control. Her network would be dismantled, her victims would recover their assets, and no other families would suffer what ours had endured. But the real victory wasn't Amanda's imprisonment. The real victory was sitting around my kitchen table the next morning, watching Emma help Jake pour syrup on his pancakes, while Michael read job listings from 3 different companies that had already expressed interest in hiring him. Amanda had tried to steal our future, but she'd failed to understand something fundamental about real families. We don't just survive attacks on our unity. We emerge from them stronger, closer, and more grateful for what we have. 3 months later, Michael would start his new job with a salary that was actually higher than what he'd been making before Amanda's theft. 6 months later, we would move into a house just 2 blocks from mine, close enough for daily visits but far enough for independence. A year later, Emma would be taking piano lessons with the same teacher who'd taught Michael when he was her age, and Jake would be playing Little League baseball with his grandfather's old glove. But all of that was still in the future. For now, it was enough to sit in my kitchen with my son and grandchildren, eating pancakes and making plans for the day ahead, safe in the knowledge that Amanda Morrison would never hurt us again. 2 years later, I stood in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, making coffee and watching Emma and Jake chase fireflies in my backyard through the window. It was summer again, but this time there was no tension in the air, no walking on eggshells around someone's unpredictable moods, no carefully managed schedules designed to keep family members separated from each other. Michael appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, but moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who no longer lived in constant fear of criticism. His new job at Morrison & Associates, no relation to Amanda, just one of those coincidences that life sometimes provides, had been everything he'd hoped for. More money, better hours, colleagues who appreciated his skills, and most importantly, a work environment where success was measured by actual performance rather than political maneuvering. Morning, Mom. The kids are up early today. Emma's excited about her piano recital tonight, and Jake didn't want to miss catching fireflies before they go back to sleep. I poured him a cup of coffee, adding cream the way he'd liked it since he was 16. Are you nervous about tonight? A little. It's the first time I've invited people from work to a family event since. He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. Since Amanda. Since the 8 years when family events were carefully curated performances designed to impress people rather than celebrate genuine moments. Emma's been practicing that piece for months. She's ready. I know she is. It's just that tonight feels important somehow. Like we're officially announcing that we're a real family again. That we're not hiding from anything or anyone. I understood what he meant. For 2 years, we'd been rebuilding our lives quietly, privately, focusing on healing and reconnection rather than external validation. But tonight's recital felt different. Tonight, Michael was inviting his colleagues, his boss, even some new friends he'd made through Emma's school. Tonight was about celebration rather than recovery. Michael, I said, settling into my chair across from him, you've been a real family all along. Amanda tried to convince you otherwise, but she never actually had the power to change what you meant to each other or to me. She could manipulate the circumstances, control the environment, create confusion and doubt, but she couldn't change love. He smiled, the kind of genuine smile that had become so much more frequent over the past 2 years. Sometimes I look at Emma and Jake now, seeing how happy they are, how free they are to just be themselves, and I wonder how I ever thought what we had before was normal. It was a question he'd asked himself countless times during the healing process. How had he accepted a life where his children walked on eggshells, where family gatherings were tense performances, where his own mother was treated like an unwelcome intrusion? The answer, we'd learned through therapy and countless conversations, was that the change had been so gradual, so skillfully orchestrated, that he'd adapted to each small shift without recognizing the larger pattern. Normal is relative, I told him. When someone you trust keeps adjusting your reality little by little, it becomes very difficult to remember what healthy relationships actually look like. Amanda was an expert at making abnormal situations feel inevitable. Do you think she ever actually loved us? Any of us? It was a question that still haunted him sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, when he wondered if there had been genuine moments in their relationship, or if everything had been calculated manipulation from the very beginning. I think Amanda loved the idea of what you could provide for her. The lifestyle, the social status, the financial security. But love requires seeing another person as a complete individual with their own needs, dreams, and value. Amanda saw you as a resource to be managed. She saw Emma and Jake as leverage to be used. She saw me as an obstacle to be removed. That's not love, sweetheart. That's ownership. Emma burst through the kitchen door, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. Grandma, I caught 3 fireflies. Jake only caught 1, but I let him keep it because his jar was empty. That was very generous of you, sweetheart. Jake followed, moving more slowly because he was carefully protecting his precious cargo. Look, Grandma, it's glowing. I examined his jar with appropriate seriousness. That's a beautiful firefly, Jake. What are you going to name it? Lightning. Perfect name for a lightning bug. These were the moments that reminded me why fighting for my family had been worth every sleepless night, every phone call to federal prosecutors, every hour spent building the case that would ultimately destroy Amanda's network. Not the dramatic courtroom confrontations or the satisfaction of seeing justice served, but these quiet morning moments when my grandchildren felt free to be excited about fireflies, generous with their discoveries, confident that their enthusiasm would be met with genuine interest rather than criticism. Daddy, Emma said, settling into her chair at the table, are you coming to watch me play piano tonight? I wouldn't miss it, and I've invited some friends from work to come hear you play. Really? Like a real audience? Like a real audience. Are you ready for that? Emma considered this seriously. I think so. I've been practicing every day, and Grandma says I sound beautiful. Grandma is right. You do sound beautiful. After Michael left for work and the children finished breakfast, Emma and I sat at my old piano for her final practice session before the recital. She'd been taking lessons for 18 months now, and watching her progress had been one of the unexpected joys of our reconstructed family life. Amanda had enrolled Emma in expensive piano lessons when she was 5, but they'd been the kind of high-pressure, performance-focused instruction designed to produce impressive results quickly, rather than foster genuine love of music. Emma had been anxious and perfectionist about playing, worried constantly about making mistakes, and had actually begun to hate practicing. Now, with a different teacher who focused on enjoyment rather than just achievement, Emma played with confidence and joy. She made mistakes without panic, experimented with different interpretations, and most importantly, played because she loved the way music felt under her fingers. Grandma, she said as we worked through her recital piece one final time, do you think Mommy Amanda will ever come back? It was the first time she'd asked about Amanda in over 6 months, and I chose my words carefully. Emma deserved honesty, but she also deserved to feel secure in her current life. No, sweetheart. Amanda is in prison for a very long time because she hurt people and broke important laws. She won't be coming back. Good, Emma said, but with less certainty than usual. I mean, I'm glad she can't hurt Daddy or you anymore, but sometimes I wonder if she ever really loved me and Jake. My heart clenched. This was the hardest part of Amanda's legacy, the confusion she'd left in Emma's mind about what love looked like, what family meant, what she could expect from the adults who were supposed to care for her. Emma, I think Amanda loved you the way she was capable of loving anyone. But some people don't know how to love in healthy ways. They try to control the people they care about instead of supporting them. They get angry when those people don't do exactly what they want. That's not real love. What's real love then? Real love means wanting someone to be happy and safe and free to be themselves, even when that's not convenient for you. Real love means protecting people, not using them. Real love means being proud of who someone is, not trying to change them into what you want them to be. Emma nodded thoughtfully, her small fingers picking out melodies on the piano keys. Like how you love me and Jake and Daddy. Exactly like that. And like how Daddy loves us? Yes. And like how you love your brother, even when he's being annoying. Emma giggled. Jake is pretty annoying sometimes, but I still want him to be happy. That's real love. That evening, the elementary school auditorium was filled with proud families celebrating their children's musical achievements. I sat in the third row, watching Michael save seats for his work colleagues, seeing him interact with other parents with the easy confidence of someone who no longer questioned whether he belonged in social situations. For 8 years, Amanda had made every public event a source of anxiety for Michael. Would he say the right thing? Would I embarrass the family somehow? Would other parents judge their lifestyle, their choices, their relationships? He'd learned to see every gathering as a performance to be managed rather than a community to be joined. Now he moved through the crowd like someone who understood that most people were just trying to do their best for their families, that social interactions didn't have to be competitions, that making genuine connections was more valuable than creating perfect impressions. When Emma took the stage, her face serious and focused as she adjusted the piano bench to the right height, I felt the familiar swell of pride and love that grandmothers experience watching their grandchildren achieve something important to them. But underneath that predictable emotion was something deeper: gratitude. Gratitude that I was here to witness this moment. Gratitude that Emma felt confident enough to perform for a room full of people without fear of criticism or judgment. Gratitude that Michael was in the audience, relaxed and proud, rather than tense and worried about appearances. Emma played beautifully, her small hands moving across the keys with the fluid confidence that comes from thorough preparation and genuine enjoyment. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic and warm, but what mattered most was the way her face lit up when she spotted us in the audience, the way she waved with unself-conscious delight. Afterward, as we gathered in the lobby, Michael's colleagues approached with genuine compliments and easy conversation. These were people who knew him as a skilled professional, a devoted father, and a trustworthy friend. They had no idea about Amanda, about the years of manipulation and control, about the dramatic federal case that had dominated our lives 2 years ago. To them, Michael was simply a good man raising his children well, and that was exactly as it should be. The past had been resolved, justice had been served, and now we were free to be exactly who we'd always been underneath the chaos Amanda had created. Mr. Morrison, Emma's piano teacher approached with a warm smile. Emma has made remarkable progress this year. She's become one of my most dedicated students. She practices every day, Michael said proudly. My mother has been incredibly supportive, letting Emma use her piano whenever she wants. It's wonderful when families prioritize music education. So many children give up because they don't have consistent support at home. I watched Michael's face as he absorbed this casual compliment, this assumption that of course our family supported Emma's interests. Of course we worked together to help her succeed. Of course love and music and celebration were natural parts of our daily life. For 8 years, Amanda had convinced him that family support was conditional, that love had to be earned through perfect behavior, that celebrations were performances designed to impress others rather than genuine expressions of joy and pride. Now Emma's teacher was reflecting back to him the reality we'd always been capable of. We were a family that loved unconditionally, supported each other's dreams, and found genuine pleasure in each other's achievements. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and Michael had gone home to his house 2 blocks away, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, listening to the summer sounds of my neighborhood: crickets, distant laughter from a backyard gathering, the soft hum of air conditioners working against the humid night. 2 years ago, I'd sat in this same spot, making phone calls to federal prosecutors and building the case that would destroy Amanda's criminal network. Tonight, the only sound was peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Thank you for tonight. Thank you for everything. I love you, Mom." I texted back, "I love you too, sweetheart. Sleep well." Tomorrow would bring the ordinary challenges of family life. Emma had a dentist appointment. Jake had soccer practice. Michael had a presentation at work that he was nervous about. I would make lunch for the children, help with homework, listen to their stories about school and friends and the small dramas that make up childhood. These were the victories that mattered most. Not the dramatic courtroom confrontations or the headlines about federal prosecutions, but the simple freedom to live our lives without fear, without manipulation, without walking on eggshells around someone's unpredictable moods and impossible demands. Amanda Morrison had tried to steal our family, but family isn't something that can be stolen. She'd tried to convince Michael that his instincts couldn't be trusted, but healing had restored his confidence. She'd tried to use Emma and Jake as pawns in her schemes, but children are remarkably resilient when they're surrounded by genuine love. Most importantly, she'd tried to erase me from my son's life, to reduce me to an irrelevant old woman whose opinions didn't matter and whose presence wasn't wanted. That had been her biggest mistake. I was Judge Patricia Morrison. I'd spent 30 years protecting families from people exactly like her. And when she'd declared war on my family, she'd discovered that some battles can't be won through manipulation and control. Some battles require actual strength, genuine intelligence, and the kind of connections that are built through decades of integrity, rather than years of deception. Amanda Morrison was serving life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Her criminal network had been dismantled. Her victims had recovered their assets and rebuilt their lives. And I was sitting on my back porch, listening to crickets and planning Emma's birthday party, surrounded by the family she'd tried to destroy and the peace she'd tried to steal. In the end, love really had conquered all. It just took a federal judge to make sure justice was served in the process.